Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sola Abulu and Associates Learning Channel. If you're new, welcome on board. If you've been here before, thank you for joining me again. And today we're going to be talking about internal communications and organizational effectiveness. And the reason why I decided to do a video on this, is that anyway, it's going to be a very short one. I'm hoping it will be a short one, shorter than 30 minutes. And I think I need to time myself just to make sure. Yeah. So I decided to do this because I saw that I just think there is scope for more understanding around the value that internal communications brings to organizations and how it makes organizations more effective. I think I sort of get the sense that organizations think it's a nice to have or something you do, when you're at that stage when you just think you want to have some flash, in your company and that sort of thing. I think, in my view, once you get into a business, you have an organization that has more than 100 people, it's no longer word of mouth, is not really the way to go about your communications. It has to be a bit more intentional, it has to be a bit more purposeful. And I think that's the whole space where internal communications then becomes a thing. And anyway, Sola Abulu and Associates is a strategy and communications consulting firm. We actually do strategy for businesses, for organizations, and then we also dovetail that into communications, which can be internal or external, as the case may be. We also, have very strong skills in reputation risk management as a whole. We organize trainings and that sort of thing. So that's the background with which I come into a lot of this with over 20, almost 25 years or more experience. But anyways, today it's about internal communications and how that ties into organizational effectiveness. I know if you are an organizational leader, you're a business leader, you're running an organization, you're leading a team, however big or small, you want it to be effective. So this is really about how communications plays a role in that. And this is internal. It's not about press releases. It's not about social media. It's not about things on the internet. It's about how you communicate with your employees or the people working within your organization to ensure that you get the desired results. Now, this is applicable whether in any organizations, whether it's profits, non-profits, is immaterial. So church, hospitals, schools, development agencies, parents teachers association, village meeting, whatever, depending on how big it is. And the bigger it is, the more complex, the more people, the more communications comes into being. And I would recommend everyone to also check out the video on internal introduction to strategic communications, which is also on my channel. That gives a bit of background into the basics of communications from a purposeful perspective, which is what really SA&A is all about. We're all about how we use communications to drive business and organizational outcomes. So what is organizational effectiveness? And I'm watching my time. Organizational effectiveness is when an organization produces a desired effect. In other words, I set up an organization and I decide that this is what I wanted to achieve. And then I can say that that organization is effective when I have put in a process and people are working within that process in such a way that exactly what I intended in terms of my vision, my mission, is what we're actually delivering. That organization is then said to be effective. An organization is also said to be productive without waste if it is, producing in a way that is not eroding any value whatsoever. So it's effective. It's also said to be effective if it is efficient with a consistent, and I like this, oh Lord, I really like this, with a consistent ability to meet objectives. Because some people, and I think that's a problem with a lot of organizations, we're able to deliver objectives, but not consistently. And that's not what you want. So this month, your sales is this high, the next one is dropping, and then, okay, they say, okay, because it was Mr. X or Mr. Y that was on duty. By the time you change the crew, you change the team, you get different outcomes. So there's something going on there. And yeah, that organization is not as effective as it could be. And when we look at the circle on the right-hand side, this I got from the leadershipcircle.com, the 6 systems of organizational effectiveness. And this, I think I have put that link there because I think it's important and it's good for all of us to go and check it out. But sorry, let me just stop this. Yeah, so this particular model, the the circle, I got this from the leadershipcircle.com, and it shows the different ways in which organizational effectiveness plays out in real life. So it says leadership is at the center of everything, where you articulate the vision, the strategy, you define culture, you commit to results, so that the organization can thrive. And then it talks about how you build an environment of accountability. It talks about communication, delivery systems that you put in place, how you go about your human performance, selecting, retaining, developing the right people, the metrics you put in place, measurements, and building an environment generally of accountability, and leadership is at the center of it all. I agree with everything on this circle, leadership circle, which is why I put it there. But the only thing I have, of course, a more in-depth, a different view of is the definition of communication, which it says it's providing the organization with an effective exchange of information. Yes, that is good, because I think a lot of people focus on that. So yes, you have an organization, there are layers, there are departments, there are structures. You need to have a system whereby information is exchanged from one point to the other. But it's not just about the exchange of information, it's about the exchange of meaning and understanding as well. The buy-in that people bring into the work that they do, the understanding, the motivation, the inspiration, the ability to take initiative, the environment that you create around that, the enforcement, the reinforcement, the validation, the reassurance, all of that. So there's a whole communication and engagement process that goes, meaning, understanding, affinity, alignment, initiative, all of that goes into the communication process. So it's much more than just a technically effective way of exchanging information, which is what I think a lot of organizations focus on and do not think about the people element, the actual communication piece, where understanding is achieved, meaning is delivered, and personal accountability, then develops as a result, regardless of who is watching, but because I now believe that this is what my sense of purpose and this is why I should be here. So yeah, so this is again showing the link between internal communications and organizational effectiveness. So this is supposed to move, but it's not moving, so I need to do something. Yeah, there you go. So internal communication, and this is now my definition of what communication is, and of course internal is the context. So it says internal communication is when we help ensure that all members of the organization are working collaboratively towards a common goal, and also when we can help to develop a cohesive culture. So internal communication helps to develop a cohesive culture and empowers employees to make the right decisions in line with the organization's goals. So you'll notice again, I got this definition from BM Magazine, and what I do, I believe very much in not reinventing the wheel. When I see definitions that work based on my experience, I take them. So this one, I think very much fits in what my experience has been in terms of what internal communications is, how it plays out when it is in organizations where it's working pretty well. And what I've done here is I have enlarged the words that I think are important to take note of. So all members of the organization, so internal communications helps all members of the organization work collaboratively, in other words, together towards a common goal, and also helps to develop a cohesive culture and empowers employees to make the right decisions in line with the organization's goals. So all members collaboratively, common goal, cohesive culture, empowering employees, right decisions in alignment with the organization's goals. So let's see where that takes us eventually. Okay, so it all begins with communications, really. So imagine you have an organization, really, and we have a vision, we have mission, we have goals. How do we get people to work together? How do we empower people? I mean, particularly when you're talking of staff at the front line, and I've seen this happen in so many organizations where there's some organizations you come into, you meet, even the security man can give you the information that you need to decide whether you should go in or how long you're going to stay, or what kind of services you can expect that day. Some security men in banks are able to do that. That is an effective organization. That is a stake in the ground, a glaring indication, because you have the culture of the organization has immersed and permeated to the point that even the person at the outermost front line is able to speak and represent the ideals of the organization, even on a daily, as in de facto, default basis. So what makes people work together? What is it that empowers staff to take initiative, to step up, to problem solve? I think, which is even the greatest thing, particularly in customer service. If you have a customer service, organization that has that kind of how would I say, interface role, what do you need to do to make your customer service people empowered to problem solve on the go, to be able to solve things that they had no idea? Every day comes with new challenges. What kind of culture do we have? And this one is a big one, because I think a lot of organizations are not intentional about the culture that they create. The culture just develops over time and everybody just flows with it. There's no intention. So whether it's a culture of waste, or it's a culture of value erosion, or it's a culture of some other things I would rather not name here, no one is really paying any attention. That organization is not effective. You are clearly, except your intention was to have an organization where anything goes is the culture, then fine, you're on track. But if you intended to have an organization that was set, up for certain objectives to achieve certain goals, and therefore people needed to behave in a particular way to achieve those goals, then we need to be intentional about how we communicate that to people on an ongoing basis. And then how do we empower staff to take ownership? So this entire circle, it may be in this order, but I think at some point, first of all, the vision and mission starts first, but just look at it as a circle that continues to go on. The end game is when your staff begin to really take ownership, and they really begin to work as though, this is something that belongs to me. In my organization where I used to work for several years in the corporate world, we used to call it enterprise first behavior. So you have success when you've gotten to the point whereby everyone in your organization has a sense of ownership. To me personally, I believe that that's the end game. I think that is stronger than collaboration. It's stronger than empowerment. I think it brings all of that together. And communications is what drives this entire process. And it's not something you achieve in a day. It's not something you achieve in 2 days or 2 months. It's an ongoing thing. But I think if you're on a journey, the point at which you can now say you have a culture, excuse me, that works towards helping you meet your organization's objectives is when you are really on the path to success. So, excuse me, still on the, how would I say, principle of empowerment, because we had talked here about what it means if you are empowered. Empowerment was the third circle in there. So when employees, and just to show us the difference between when people are empowered and when they are not empowered, when your employees in your organization are not empowered, they are lost. I mean, just imagine this as a signboard of, okay, we've come to work, we are in a factory, we're supposed to produce, there's some problems with logistics and all of that. We don't even know what's going to do. We don't know what time, the things we need for manufacturing are coming. We do not understand the time when the people at sales will be expecting us. We don't know when we're going to give invoices. The invoices people will be waiting for us. There's just a whole lot of processes that, I'm just one part of the chain, and I have no clue how what I do affects the person further down the value chain. And honestly, this is how a lot of organizations are run. Somehow they just expect people to figure it out on a day-to-day basis. It's amazing. And looking at this other circle, by the way, these were all things I got from Clipart, so which is why I'm not mentioning any sources, because they're really open source kind of material, which really shows that these are things that are they're not proprietary. They're so commonplace that even the graphics and the images around them are not even worthy of, how would I say, of anyone being proprietary rights around it. So employee empowerment is about how we enhance, how we enable, how we engage, and how we empower. See that engagement there. Communications is the common thread in all of this, And so that's really what I would be the end game, because this is really key in terms of making an employee effective. And I think many times we have to keep reminding ourselves in organizations that organizations are about people. Even the most technical organizations, I hear people talking about automation, AI, and all that, and I'm like, really? So the AI, is it going to be for other robots? The AI at the end of the day is for people. So regardless of how AI and all of those things go to, at the end of the day, you need an organization run by people that enable the AI to work in the way that is intended. We will never get fully automated to the point that we do not need to manage, to empower people to be able to deliver that which we intend. The machines will help us with the processing of data, with technical things and all of that. But in terms of the organization of human beings, it is still human beings that will do it. to a very large extent. Using technology, yes, but the thinking around it, the face-to-face engagement around it, the intuition around this is how I speak to them, this is how they would understanding how you craft the messaging, the platforms that you use, how you engage people on the field as opposed to people on the front line, people on the front desk as opposed to people in management and that sort of thing. All of those intuition based on the specific understanding of the individuals and their context. Sorry, that is not machine learning. That is not artificial intelligence. It is very much human intelligence weaved into an intentional communications plan. Now, the cost of poor communications, there was a report done by Holmes, which is a global PR survey, a global PR report. It was done in 2018, and it estimated the cost of poor communications within companies in the US and the UK at about $37 billion. And yes, I did reference this in my last webinar, I think, so I'm not going to go too much into detail into that. We could search for it on the internet. And this other picture here, another clip art, it's really funny. It's talking about, it says, this is why we lift on 3. So yes, very simple. 3 people, they were supposed to lift the patients onto the surgical table. Because of poor or ineffective communication, they didn't realize that you don't lift until we all say 1, 2, 3. So we all heave at the same time and lift onto the table. Simple. This is a clear operations process and a very simple example of how miscommunication causes misalignment and causes things to go very wrong in a lot of settings that we find ourselves in organizations. So this process was ineffective, and when something like this happens in a larger organizational context, we can say that the organization is not effective. And the baseline reason why, they knew what to do, but the communication around the timing and when to do it together, to collaborate, that's communication, there was a gap. Therefore, they had this kind of fallout that they did. And what I've done here, again, I got this also from Clipart, and what I've put on the left side is a business relationship management tool, which I think a lot of us may be familiar with. And so there are different types of this, and I guess this one is a template that was done for a government agency, and it's talking about how you create value, processes, exchange of information from the people, technology, fixed asset side, you dovetail that up to processes and activities, and then up to the missions, how you then generate outputs to achieve the outcomes that you want. And this, I think we're very much focused on that technical process and that kind of working. But the key enablers, in my perspective, and based on what I have seen, is in that red circle that we see on the right, which is how, first of all, you build a cohesive leadership team. So back again to the leadership circle that we saw at the beginning, but how you create clarity around everything that is here. Because even looking at this business relationship management tool is already how would I say, there's so much opportunity for complexity and misalignment, even based on what I see here. So if things are not made clear, the relationship between the people and technology, if that is not clarified, if you do not over communicate on certain points until you are sure that understanding has happened, you're going to have chaos. And you look for every opportunity to reinforce that clarity, whether it's at meetings, whether it's at communication sessions, whether it's at town halls, there has to be a way within the context of the organization. I always like to give references from when I was working in, the energy industry, and I remembered, particularly around safety, we over communicated on safety, and we made sure that we never missed any opportunity to reinforce that clarity about safety, so that, because really lives were at stake, you just couldn't leave it to chance. And that sort of thing is what I think, that sort of vigilance is what you need. I would say oil industry vigilance is what we need for situations like even COVID. Because you can't say you've communicated enough. No, because everybody's level of understanding is different. So you over communicate to clarify. So sometimes also you build in interactiveness, question and answer, so that people can ask and they can clarify and all of that. But so that's just the way that goes. I'm sorry, it's getting a bit dark. So, but anyways, I think you can still see me. So that's the most important thing. Yes. So, and then what you then do is you do. So I would advocate, please have an internal communication structure and a plan, and get an expert to do it, particularly if you have an organization of over 100 people or more. And then you start off with your goals. This is a very strategic thing. It's your goals, what do you want to achieve? Remember, organizational effectiveness is about achieving desired outcomes. So what is the goal of that organization? And like I said before, you can be profit, you can be non-profit, you can be anything. What are your goals? What is your audience? Who is your audience? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? What is your intention? And how do you communicate that to the point that everybody on that value chain or that productivity chain understands what they're supposed to do, why their roles are important, why it's important to deliver set something to the customer by 8 a.m. Why is it important for you to, make sure that every time invoices are brought to you, you send it to the accounts within 24 hours because there is a report that accounts delivers to head office the following day. These are things you need to communicate. People wouldn't figure it out by themselves. And there has to be a process to ensure that you don't rely on just, key man risk. Okay, this person knows, so therefore she should tell. No, there must be a process in place to ensure that everybody that comes onto that seat, they know immediately what they're supposed to do. There's a transfer of information, meaning, and understanding that enables them to act in an informed and enlightened manner in alignment with the organization's objectives at every time. You have that structure in place, you develop a process, you develop a protocol, you have a tactical plan, you measure outcomes. And I think at this point, I will just pause a bit. So yes, as you can see, I have switched on the light. So what we then have on the right side is just a word cloud around communications in an organizational context. So you can see values there. This is all for internal communications. You can see values, you can see frequency, decisions, you can see management, So all of the things that we need our employees to know, how we want them to feel and what we want them to do, we have to weave it into our communication strategy, into our internal communication strategy in a purposeful, intentional way, in a way that is tangible, in a way that we can measure the outcome based on business delivery as well as organizational performance. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying communications for the sake of communication. I'm saying communication that you can tie to outcomes. You cannot tell me the communications is running well and the business is not delivering. No, there's a problem there. So it's not, and that's another thing I see, communications for the sake of communications. No, that's a no. So if it is done well and you have a communication that is driven and very much aligned with your goals, it will help your organization to be effective because it will be driven by the strategy. It will make sure it is built upon the processes and the context of the organization. It will work with the people, use the context of the audience to shape the messaging, to curate and dice it, to select the platforms whereby certain things will be communicated, have checks in place to make sure that that meaning and understanding is transferred. And you will know that by setting key performance indicators to check if at the end of the day, the targets that have been set on a business delivery side have been met. Because if communications is working well, it should enable the delivery of the outcomes. That is what business communications is about. That is what internal communications is about when done well and rightly. And it is a very effective tool to actually problem solve within an organization. It can actually tell you how healthy your organization is, which is back to that red circle that we saw. Because even by asking simple questions, we can test understanding. In fact, most of the time, you do a communications or organizational health check, you can quickly tell the organizations where there's no clarity around strategy, there's no clarity around intent, there is limited clarity around purpose. Therefore, there is very, very inconsistent delivery. Therefore, the organization is not effective. It is either eroding value, it is very wasteful, and it is therefore not achieving its met objectives, or its set objectives rather. So I will close with this slide. I think this is my last slide, thank goodness. So, and this is a concept that one professor from Ghana, Professor Robert Henson from Ghana mentioned to me at some point when I was on a webinar for the IABC Africa West Africa Interest Group, which is a group that I'm part of, an association, professional association that I'm part of. He mentioned the fact that a lot of companies in Africa, a lot of organizations in Africa struggle to match their business delivery with their brand promise. He actually said service delivery, but what I have here is business delivery, because I realized that this is not just, or rather it should be delivery actually, delivery equal to brand promise, because this should be generic to everyone, whether you're a business, whether you're an organization, whether you have a product or a service, because so whatever it is, I think everyone has a brand promise. We have an organizational promise. We either say we are created to, make things easier, to deliver fast, or to have, the best in class of this or that. And we have a promise that we quickly come up with when we come up with our vision and mission and strategy and all of that. But the ability to match that business delivery, in other words, how we show up in our everyday interfaces with our partners, with our investors, with our contractors, with our customers, with our employees, with everybody that we interact with on the business level, the ability to match that promise with the delivery is completely misaligned. And to a very large extent, internal communications can be the glue that helps us close that gap. And this word cloud that we're looking at gives an indication of this. So it says everything that goes into your brand and how your brand shows up at the end of the day. There's the internal piece, which is around the communications. There's the workforce element. And that's how do you keep them engaged? How do you connect with them? How do you share meaning? You see the communications there somewhere in the middle. How do you create expressions within the organization? What kind of architecture do you have in place? How do the disciplines interact with one another? How do you engage with stakeholders? How do you nurture and build learning? How do you distinguish? How do you help people to know the difference between what this department is doing, what I'm doing, what our interrelationships are, what our interdependencies are? How do you enable them to know when the priority, that when there's urgency on something and they should not dilly-dally? So all of that, relevance, analysis, everything that is here are all of the elements that we need to keep an organization working in the way that it should. And regardless of how big, I think the bigger the organization is, the more these things are relevant. And I think, like I said, anything 100 people or more. I'm not even going to talk about, some people try to say, okay, if you have, a bottom balance sheet of X amounts of dollars. I don't go with that, because for me, the complexity is about the people. So it's not really about how much is in your balance sheet, it's how many people you are managing. That's the issue. That's what determines the complexity of your organization, because you could have a very lean organization and a massive balance sheet depending on what you do. It's possible theoretically. So if you have less people, then the complexity is less, and perhaps you may not need to have the kind of structure that we're talking about. Just run yourself emails back and forth, call people, WhatsApp, and all of that. Perhaps not put too much purpose to it, but even those ones you can be. If there's a lot of money involved, please, you had better be a bit more intentional, even about communication to those 2 or 3 or 4. But let's just say, for the purposes of conversation or this discussion, that is actually theoretically possible. Definitely not when you're having 100. In fact, 50, you're already in a dangerous place. But let's leave that 100. Honestly, you have to have a very purposeful and intentional internal communications plan, because it is the key to organizational effectiveness. And every time any opportunity or gap that we leave for employees to be unsure, to be confused or perplexed, or have to figure things out themselves without having a compass, an organizational compass to follow, it is a recipe for chaos. And honestly, in this time of COVID, I think my guidance to a lot of companies and organizations is that there's a lot going on in the external environment that is outside of our control. Let us hone in on the things that are within our control. I think now more than ever, for companies and businesses, organizations in Africa and also in other parts of the world, getting a stronger sense of what's going on within your organization. We do not have that latitude to be lax or nonchalant or nonchalant about what is going on within our organizations and how our employees are, building meaning for themselves, and how they're finding out information, and how they're acting, and how they're delivering, and all of that. We have to be, I think, management, business leaders, organizational leaders have to be a bit more intentional about that. So that's the end of my presentation. I think I have done, yes, 30 minutes, a little bit more. And yeah, so this is us. We're on basically most of the channels. That's our website. You can check us out as well. And that's my email. Yeah, and yeah, we're research advising, consulting, strategy, reputation, risk, and organizational effectiveness. So thank you very much for joining us. And please watch out for the next video. Apologies for the several breaks in transmission that you probably would have noticed on this one. But yeah, it's better. I'm glad that I got this done. So thank you for joining me. And yeah, do stay safe as usual. Thank you so much.